Russian-backed forces have taken control of the city of Lyman in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian forces attacking the city had been well organized and heavy fighting is ongoing on the outskirts also of Severodonetsk as Russian troops try to capture the city, which is under almost continuous shelling. The city's mayor says 60% of the housing is completely destroyed and up to 90% of buildings are damaged. 10 people have been killed and up to 35 wounded as a result of Russian missile strikes on a Ukrainian military base in Dnipro district. Now, Ukraine's President Zelensky says his country is not eager to hold peace talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, but it will have to anyway. Russia, in turn, is blaming Ukraine for the freeze in negotiations after spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said it was unclear what Kyiv wanted, accusing Ukrainian leadership of contradictory statements. Here's more in this report.
Social media video monitored earlier in the week showing explosions in the field in Novomyk-Halivka in Ukraine's Donetsk region has now been confirmed. However, the date of the explosion is unknown. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense shared the same video using the caption, Russia's TOS-1A shelling Ukrainian positions near Donetsk. They are describing it as what the largest and most horrific war of the 21st century looks like. It says Ukraine is ready to strike back, but to do this, they need NATO-style MLRS immediately. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says it blames Ukraine for the fact that peace talks between the two countries are frozen, saying it is unclear what Kyiv wants. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, in a call with reporters, said the Ukrainian leadership constantly makes contradictory statements. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier that he had tried repeatedly to organize a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war, but that Russia did not appear to be ready yet for serious peace talks. For countries by the Baltic Sea region, Turkey expects Sweden and Finland to take concrete action and halt what it says is their support for terrorist groups in order for Ankara to lift its objections to them joining NATO. Finland and Sweden formally applied to join NATO last week, seeking to boost security following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They hope it would be a quick accession process, and other NATO members touted the planned enlargement as historic.
Contrary to many voices, I'm very optimistic about the prospect of settling this, how should I put it, dispute, and in the best spirit of a long NATO unity and partner solidarity, this issue will be solved. So I'm very optimistic about the accession of Sweden and Finland, and certainly given the dynamics of the political and military processes in our part of Europe, it's certainly not going to take years or months, as you were kind enough to put it.
On the impact of the cutoff from Black Sea wheat imports at an agricultural store complex in the Egyptian city of Benna, Ahmed Nasser watches truck after truck offload freshly threshed grain from the surrounding Nile Delta. Cut off from much of the Black Sea wheat it depended on by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Egypt, often the world's biggest importer, is straining to extract whatever it can from a local harvest now in full flow.
This year specifically, we could not discard large amounts of wheat with moisture or full of impurities. This year, we are storing large amounts in silos. We are supposed to leave at 4 p.m., but this year especially, we sometimes work until midnight, and some trucks stay past midnight. They stay overnight.
The government, which provides deeply subsidized bread to more than 70 million of Egypt's estimated 106 million people, has set an ambitious target to buy 6 million tons of domestic wheat this year, two-thirds more than in either of the previous 2 years.
Mr. John Essen is a lawyer and anti-terrorism expert. He joins me virtually from London. Welcome to the program. Now, let's begin with the highlights of the week, the war trial. What are your thoughts on the conclusion of the trial of Shishimarin, the first Russian to be sentenced for war crimes in this invasion?
Thank you for having me, Millicent. Good evening. It was more or less an unplanned and short case. Because the prosecution were able to prove intent, they were able to prove motive, and they could tie the bullet, the vital bullet that actually killed the victim, to the Kalashnikov, the Russian-made gun that shot the victim. But what actually struck me, what I found intriguing, was the symbolism of the case, because I think it's a deterrent to other Russian military who are currently in Ukraine, that if any of them contravenes the rules of law or the Geneva Conventions or their protocols of 1977, then they will be convicted and they'll end up maybe spending the rest of their lives in Russia rather than in Ukraine, rather than in Russia, where they come from. So I think it was more symbolic than anything else, because he's only 21 years old. He looks more like a boy than he's 21 years. He looks like a teenager. And I actually think that others have been apprehended who may have been older, but he was used, for the basis, like I said, of symbolism, just to inform other Russians and serve as a deterrent that, the full force of the law will be brought down on anyone who contravenes the rules of law, the rules of war, sorry.
Indeed, and we also hear, on the other hand, Russian-backed separatists are reporting over 8,000 Ukrainians are, are being held in those parts of Donbass, and one wonders what will happen to them. But then Russia's bombardment is continuing in Donbass. Ukraine says it won't cede any territories. Are we moving forward or moving backwards?
Sometimes it's difficult to analyze these kinds of wars on a daily basis, because it's a war of attrition, which essentially means that either side is trying to wear themselves down, wear down the personnel and their equipment until one blinks. So they're waiting for who to blink. While Russia is advancing and while Ukraine is retreating, it doesn't necessarily mean that Russia is having an advantage and Ukraine is retreating because it can't fight. I think what's happening is Ukraine is withdrawing from their positions to take positions further back from where the Russians are, in order to secure fortified positions to wait for the Russians. In other words, it's a trap, because at the moment they don't quite have the weapons to fight the Russians. They're still waiting for the weapons that are coming with the package from the $400 billion that was voted in Congress, that had a bilateral consensus with the Democrats and the Republicans. The weapons might get there by next week. So for the moment, they don't have anything to fight with. So what they're doing is withdrawing to fortified positions and waiting for the Russians to come at them, because they also know that the Russians do not have enough forces to encircle. Severodonetsk is the city you're referring to. They're attacking from 3 different positions, but they don't have the troops to encircle it. So that the Ukrainians are moving back, waiting for them to stretch their supply lines until they're exhausted. And hopefully, coincidentally, the weapons they're waiting for will have reached them, and then we can start seeing counterattacks from the Ukrainians against the Russians.
Also, in another vein, Ukraine has urged maximum sanctions on Russia. We've seen Lithuania saying it's going to draw its ambassador from Russia June the 1st. We've also heard Russia diplomats quitting over the war in Ukraine, but it hasn't stopped Russia yet. Is it Russia that must end this war, or Ukraine?
Well, we have to remember that Russia is the one who launched an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation, violating its territorial integrity. So if anyone has to end the war, it has to be Russia. But Russia will be very happy to end the war now. It'll be very happy to negotiate because they're in a stronger position. So if anyone wants to negotiate now, it'll be Russia. But what Ukraine would want, if Russia wants to negotiate, is to restore the parties to the conflict to the pre-February 24th position, the day Russia invaded Ukraine. Let's start from there. Ukraine will be wanting that those positions restored, as if the war had not started. Then they can negotiate from there. Ukraine does not want to cede any of its territories to Russia for any kind of negotiations, not even the Donbass and the Crimea Peninsula. But what Ukraine wants to do is, if they are restored to those positions, then they can have they can vote in those two areas to have a referendum for the constituents to decide if they want to be with Russia or if they want to be with Ukraine. And Ukraine definitely knows that, given that Russia is now a pariah state, it is an international outlaw, financial outlaw, and it doesn't have any real support from anyone apart from China, which is its main ally. That most of those concerns will want to stay with Ukraine. So they should get international institutions, relevant international institutions like the UN, involved to oversee any such referendum, and then decide from there. But if any negotiations takes place now, I don't think that Ukraine will agree on the basis that Russia keeps everything they've gained. Because I hear there are even back-channel conversations between Emmanuel Macron, Silvio Berlusconi, the former Italian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, and who am I leaving out? The German Chancellor Scholz, all trying to exert pressure on Zelensky to cede some of Ukrainian territory for peace. I don't think he's going to agree to that. I mean, he is not a politician. He's a very straightforward person. He only came into politics by default. He's a 44-year-old Jewish actor who just happened to become president because the government before him had no more legitimacy. So he was voted into power, by coincidence. So he's going to stick by what his people want. And more than 80% of Ukrainians don't want any of their territory ceded to Russia, even for peace, after what they've suffered. So,
but I definitely know that they definitely want this invasion, this war, this special operation to end.
Who wants it to end?
The Ukrainians and the rest of the world suffering the impact, the after effect of this invasion.
Absolutely, but the Ukrainians don't want to be scapegoats because the Western democracies are exerting pressure on Zelensky to negotiate with Russia, and Zelensky, everyone knows that Russia is in a strong position to negotiate, and they are not going to cede any land they've succeeded in taking from Ukraine. They are not going to. Russia would want to keep it. Mariupol as indispensable. It's an indispensable imperative to Ukraine being a nation. Ukraine cannot cede Mariupol to Russia because that would be the end of it. That's the biggest part, and it's labeled the breadbasket of Europe. That's not just some superficial cliche. That's actually true. So if it gives up Mariupol, it might as well give up the whole of Ukraine. So it's not going to agree to that. It just has to see this face through. And that is the problem with Western democracies, because they don't have the stomach for a fight. They run their agendas on 4 or 5 year election cycles, and depending on what happens in those years. And Zelensky, the reason Zelensky is insisting that he doesn't want any territory ceded, that he wants everything back, is because eventually, the UK will start discussing about Partygate. United States will be discussing the school shooting in Texas. Everyone will go about his own business, and they'll forget Ukraine. So that's why Zelensky is insisting that he wants everything done now, and that he wants every land that Russia has taken from Ukraine restored. That they have to go back to the 1991 positions they were when Ukraine gained independence from Russia.
And John, you've actually teased some of the lineup we have for on the program later today. But I just want to quickly ask you, and this is Ukrainian President Zelensky, what he said in terms of complaining about divisions inside the EU over more sanctions against Russia, and asking why some nations are being allowed to block the plan. I mean, in this case, can anyone blame Hungary?
Not necessarily, but Hungary is not much different. I know it's a democracy, but the way that Viktor Orban runs his government is like a totalitarian state. I don't know what concessions he's made to Vladimir Putin prior to the invasion of Ukraine. A bit like Belarus. So I don't know. Maybe that back channel, diplomatic back and forth going back between Viktor Orban and Putin. On the face of it, you wouldn't want to blame him, but he's not looking for any way to even negotiate. He's taking his stance and he's not going to move. I mean, if it was even possible for him to negotiate or give something away, maybe the rest of the EU would have, gone round to see what they could do to help him until he sees out the face. But he's not ready to talk. So I don't know whether to blame him or not, but I think he should at least listen.
All right.
Because if Ukraine doesn't get the help it needs, then all of Europe is going to be in trouble anyway. So.
We always appreciate your time, expertise on the program. Mr. John Essing is a lawyer and anti-terrorism expert. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Minister. Bye.
And the UK's top diplomat says countries supporting Ukraine have to be ready for the long haul, and there should be no talk of appeasing President Putin. Now, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said after meeting her Czech counterpart in Prague today that they need to make sure that Ukraine wins and that Russia withdraws, and that they never see this type of Russian aggression again. Ms. Truss says that Ukraine needs to receive more heavy weapons and gradually get upgraded to get NATO standard equipment.
We must ensure that Taiwan is also able to defend itself. We both agree that NATO needs to step up. We need to do more to protect the edges of Europe, including Moldova and the Balkans, which I visited earlier this week. We also need to strengthen the eastern flank, and we need to make sure that Finland and Sweden are able to join NATO as soon as possible. We need to do more on cyber warfare to protect ourselves against the hybrid threat. And we have to be ready for the long haul in supporting Ukraine, because we are committed to protecting freedom and democracy. We are very clear it is completely legitimate to be supporting Ukraine with tanks, with planes, and we are very supportive of the work that the Czech Republic has done, sending tanks to Ukraine. In terms of what the UK is doing, we are helping Poland specifically, who are also sending tanks to Ukraine in terms of backfilling some of that support into Poland. But what we need to make sure is that supply of heavy weapons continues to get to Ukraine. They continue to have our support, and also we're looking at how to upgrade Ukraine to make sure they've got NATO standard equipment. So at the moment they're using a lot of ex-Soviet equipment. We need to make sure they're able to defend themselves into the future. That's some work that we're currently doing with Poland and Ukraine, but I've also been talking to Jan about how the Czech Republic can be involved in that as well.